Greetings everyone in the room and those of you who are watching online. All right, we're starting off a quote tonight from Jackie O, former First Lady. The first time you marry for love, the second for money, and the third for companionship. The reason I use this is, the truth is, people marry for different reasons. People form relationships for different reasons. And the astrological chart is actually a great way for us to discover what motivates us in companionship. Here's a quote from Zane, and this comes from Astrological Signatures, the second book of the Brotherhood of Light series. Perhaps there is no department of life in which the doctrine of signatures plays a more important part than in our association with others. The centers of energy within the astral body of each person are radiating energy. Some of these centers radiate harmonious energy, and some of them radiate discordant energy. Thus, when we come in close contact with another person, our astral bodies receive the impact of these vibrations, and our centers of energy are greatly stimulated. But the manner in which they are stimulated depends, in great measure, not merely upon the harmony of these centers considered separately, but upon the natural harmony or discord that obtains between the centers of energy in one person's astral body as related to the centers of energy in the astral body of the other person. A comparison of birth charts indicates quickly just how one person will affect another if they become closely associated, and in just what department of life and how the harmony or discord will manifest. I actually thought, although long, it's very clear and succinct what he's saying. And this is what we're doing when we look at charts for compatibility. We are looking exactly to see how one individual's astral form or character is interacting with another. Quite often, we're looking at our chart as compared to another person. It's one of the first things we do when we meet people is we want to see their chart. And quite often, we're looking at the points of energy in their chart as it impacts ours. Well, you can also get a good idea if you just spend time with anyone. We have those things we call first impressions, where we may feel compelled and attracted to someone or repelled by someone, or over time, people's certain, irritating characteristics start to grate on our very last nerve. So these are all things that we experience with one another. And there are many types of relationships, although in tonight's chart, at least the printed focus is on love and companionship. The truth is there are so many types of relationships that we have with others. Parents with children, children with parents. We have, sibling relationships. We have bosses and employees. We have co-workers having relationships. There are the relationships between friends. There are relationships between lovers and relationships between companions. And I'm sure there are many others out there. Your dentist and you have a relationship. And so often, when we're entering into those types of relationships, we want to get a sense of, are their energy centers going to be stimulating me in a favorable way or an unfavorable way? So the chart is sort of the shortcut to that. The other way is having to spend about 40 days with someone. So you really get the full treatment. Or just take a one-week vacation.
But even if you have positive, harmonized features in your chart, you can't tell how evolved or unevolved somebody is, whether they'll sync with you on that
Exactly. And that is the ultimate example we will use in tonight's charts, is that, again, the chart only shows energy centers and whether we are attracted or repelled by someone. But again, we don't know to what level. From looking at a chart, we don't know if it's a chart of a cockroach, a cat, or a human being. So we also don't know within the strata of human society to what degree of refinement that soul has developed and whether that level of refinement is compatible with yours or not. So these are all things we have to keep in mind. There is just so much we look at when we look at compatibility. But the main rule is this. Another Zane quote from Occultism Applied. The one thing that should ever be remembered in this effort is that pleasure is attractive and pain is repellent. That's the bottom line. This is what causes us to keep friends in our lives or to lose them, to keep lovers in our lives or to lose them, to decide whether we stay at home till we're 29 or whether we move out the day after we turn 18. Basically, this is the law.
Why is it that sometimes initially you may feel attracted to them, but then over time you repel?
And that is usually signified when we get to it in tonight's class by oppositions in a chart. Oppositions are immediately compelling and over time repelling. All right. From the astrological perspective, we are attracted to and feel compatibility with those persons with whom we share similarities and who stimulate the harmony within our chart. We are repelled by those persons with whom we have too great of dissimilarities and who stimulate discords in our chart. In Occultism Applied, this is book 14 of the Brotherhood of Light lessons. It's such a great practical book. Zane says, not only do people grow after marriage, but they should grow. Unfortunately, one may grow in one direction and the other in a different way. If, therefore, they do not have a mutual, intense interest, they should select something for both to become interested in. It is even more essential in later life, when the passions seem less important and the early problems have been solved, that husband and wife should have something that both delight in to discuss and work for. It is mental compatibility that lends the finest flavor to domestic existence. In talking about partnership, one of the first things we do is we are looking for natal constants in a chart that gives us clues about either our relationship with relationships, our attitudes towards partnership, the type of person that we're attracted to. The seventh house, with its power, harmony, or discord, determines in general the kind of partners that are attracted into the life. The seventh house ruler and its aspects determine how the partner will affect the life. So this is the very first step in looking at your own chart, is you want to know what planet or planets fall in your seventh house. You want to know the sign on the cusp of your seventh house and the planet or planets that rule that. And then what you want to do is look at the general harmony and discord of the 7th house, the individual harmony and discord of each of the planets, and then even for greater detail, you look at each and every aspect that is formed between the rulers of your 7th house and the other planets in the chart, taking into account house position, because this will indicate all of the details that you will encounter, all of the patterns that you will encounter in partnership. Let's go with a nice big quote, which comes from Delineating the Horoscope. In talking about partnership, Zane says, the stellar cells and stellar structures mapped by the 7th house, their harmony or discord, and the intensity of their activity, as well as the general quality, determine the kind of partners in general that are attracted into the life. If Saturn is in the 7th, all partners will tend to be serious and cold. If Jupiter is there, they will tend to be jovial and benevolent. Thus, from the planet in the 7th, or less precisely, from the ruler of the cusp of the 7th, can be gauged the general type of partner which the individual will have. So let's look at each of the planets in the 7th house to get an understanding of how they operate. We, of course, start with the Sun, which governs the power urges of the soul. And when the Sun is in the 7th house, the individual is drawn to a partner who is vital, powerful, dynamic, somebody who is energetic. The individual tends to attract authority figures, and they have a strong sense of significance around partnership. They're drawn to somebody who may also attract awards, honors, recognition. Now, that is, of course, providing the Sun is harmonious. If the Sun is afflicted, the partner may be domineering, condescending, authoritarian, or inclined to power struggles. So if your Sun falls in your 7th house of your chart, relationships are clearly important to you. Why? Wherever the Sun falls in our chart, that house is where we search out our self-esteem. That is where we look to be important somehow. And so the individual with the Sun in the 7th house not only looks for an important partner, but they also want to be important in the partner's eyes. So if your Sun falls in the 7th house, you may also have great needs to be treated with respect, to be not just loved, but admired by the companion. You want to be the center of their universe, basically. What about the Moon in the 7th house? It's beginning to sound like a song from the 60s. I'm surprised Radine didn't break into song. But oh, I'm embarrassed you now, sorry. All right, when the Moon is in the 7th house, the individual is drawn to a partner who is sensitive, caring, emotional, domestic, familial, gentle, and nurturing. However, if afflicted, the partner may be moody, overly sensitive, fickle, or gossipy. So think of the Moon. The Moon both desires to nurture. So the individual with the Moon in their 7th house, there could be, the Moon looks to have a partner they can nurture. That's the nature when the Moon governs that house. They do want someone they can take care of. but also if the moon governs your 7th house, you also will discover that for you the highest sense of love is when you have a partner that will take care of you. And again, the moon, you appeal to the moon through the stomach. So for them, the moon in the 7th house, one of the things that will make them happiest is if their mate cooks for them. That way they feel like they are truly being taken care of. They judge the partnership by meals, or when they're down, how are they being cared for by the companion? All right. Yes, I can hear the dinner bell ringing. Mercury governs the intellectual urges. And this means that when Mercury rules the 7th house, the individual is drawn to a partner who is studious, intellectual, communicative, witty, and expressive. They want somebody intelligent, and they want somebody who can carry a conversation. Now, if afflicted, either the partner or the individual can be nervous, restless, verbose, and critical.
When those two energies come together in the 7th house, if they were not afflicted by themselves, but when they come together and they form a disharmony or whatever, then it becomes afflicted?
Well, what determines harmony or afflictions is the nature, the number, the nature, and type of aspects that are being formed by that planet to the other planets in the chart. And to a small degree, the sign in which the planet falls does color the conditioning of that planet and its ability to express, fully and constructively or weakly and discordantly.
So if you don't have any planets in the 7th,
You look to the sign on the cusp and the planet or planets that rule that sign. In the case of Scorpio, Aquarius, and Pisces, we have dual rulership. So we're looking at 2 planetary positions. Venus in the 7th house means an individual is drawn to a partner who is friendly, social, affectionate, amiable, creative, artistic, attractive, and aesthetic. So whether it's a man or a woman, if you have Venus in your 7th house, you want to be with a beautiful mate. It's sort of the trophy husband or trophy bride. Quite often the attraction is based on physical characteristics, one's looks, one's appearance, or one's aesthetic. But the other thing that's really important, if you have Venus in the 7th house, you want a touchy-feely partner. You want physical displays of affection, somebody who's willing to walk down the street and hold your hand. Now, if it's afflicted, then one could end up with a partner who's either lazy, overly sensual, indulgent, or pliant, somebody that becomes a doormat. And some people actually look for partners that are doormats.
Well, I'll just go along with whatever you want to do.
And that's pliant too,
Pliant.
which is not exactly a doormat, but in a sense,
Right.
It's somebody who's not standing up for what they want or what their needs are.
Right.
And you know what? To some people, that's not that important.
Some people
The
love it.
happiness of the mate is more important to them than if they're happy or not.
Mm-hmm.
And there are certainly some relationships where, if Papa's not happy or if Mama's not happy, nobody's happy. So, now the aggressive urges when they rule the seventh house, the individual is usually attracted to a partner who is assertive, passionate, courageous, and constructive. And if it's afflicted, you end up with somebody who is antagonistic, angry, and abusive. These are the aggressive urges. You can usually tell people who have Mars-ruled seventh house because they bicker frequently.
And they enjoy fighting.
And they enjoy it. It is a, you know, to them it's a sign that I'm in a relationship and everything's all right. Another form of Mars in the seventh house can be somebody who's teasing. You know, because in teasing, there's still a form of aggressiveness going on. There's just a little bit of poking or prodding or just, you know, goading the other person. So those are different layers of extreme of Mars in the seventh house. From the teasing mate to the abusive mate. All right. When Jupiter rules the seventh house, the individual is drawn to a partner who is generous, affluent, optimistic, good-willed, and religious. Though if it is afflicted, that person can be conceited, fanatical, or excessive. Generally, though, Jupiter governing the seventh house means that one gains great benefits through partnership. Gifts and other good things tend to flow. Or they end up with the partner who's sort of the cheerleader for them, who's just always not teasing them, but encouraging them, giving them pep talks and you know, building them up in some way.
Could it also mean multiple marriages because Jupiter is affluent and many partners?
It could, though generally if you have Jupiter there, once you get yourself a rich one, you're not letting go. Yeah, because one associates too much good with that. Who wants to let go of a good thing? Because pleasure is what's attractive to us. Now, Pluto in the seventh house might indicate situations of, you know, plural marriage. You know, there are different religions and or just different people that have temperaments of wanting to be polyamorous in some way or having plural partnerships. All right. Saturn is basically a downer, but we have to talk about the good side of it. If Saturn's in your seventh house, generally what you are attracted to is somebody who's older than you. Somebody who may be stable. The partner may be somewhat reserved, occasionally a stick in the mud, or conservative in their outlook and their attitudes. Now that's if it's harmonious. If afflicted, the partner may be selfish, restrictive, attract losses, or bring responsibilities. And of course that is, you know, one of the things about choosing a mate that is much older than you is chances are you are the person that is caring for them in their dotage, as it's called. So responsibilities can come through the partnership. Now, if Saturn is harmonious in the seventh house, the natural instinct of the person with Saturn in the seventh house is basically they're looking for security, and they make their decisions based on the safety urges. Is this partner safe and secure? for me? Stable. Will it last a long time? And with Saturn there, even if the relationship is hard, they can quite often stick with it. There is that degree of persistence or perseverance, or just the expectation that that is different than the person who has Venus there, that wants, their mate to be fun and attractive, and when they no longer are, is looking for the next beauty. Saturn there allows one to go through the natural stages with a companion.
So Venus could make for multiple partners too.
Yeah, because what does Venus do? She's always falling in love.
Mm-hmm.
All right, wacky Uranus. The individualistic urges. When Uranus rules the 7th house, the individual is drawn to a partner who is progressive, novel, unique, original, what I call borderline geniuses, and inventive. If Uranus governs that house, you are definitely attracted to the quirky, the unconventional, the unique in some way. You want to be with a nonconformist, or you want a non-conforming relationship. However, if afflicted, the partner may bring sudden, unexpected changes, eccentric behavior. Oh, baby, I didn't know you were crazy when I married you. Unconventionality and fads. What I have seen frequently in charts of natives with Uranus in the 7th house is relationships or marriages can end suddenly and without an aura, without knowing ahead of time that there was something wrong. They just get the surprise ending to the partnership. Neptune draws an individual to a partner who is imaginative, visionary, idealistic, intuitive, and mystical. Honey, let's go save the world together. That's what they're looking for. And if it's afflicted, they end up disappointed in partnership. They're subject to illusions, fantasy thinking, psychic sensitivity, and or monasticism. Neptune in the 7th house, one's partner can oftentimes go down mystical or spiritual lines later in life, which could include celibacy. What I see with individuals who have Neptune in the 7th house, they fall in love with the potential of the individual, which is basically the fantasy of the individual. It's not always based on who that person really is or what they're dealing with. So they are subject to illusions, and relationships can start very mystically, and they can also dissolve in the mist. Okay, and here's your answer about plural. Pluto rules the 7th house. The individual is drawn to a partner who is cooperative, spiritual, transformative, and attracts drastic changes. If afflicted, the partner may attract experiences with compulsion, conformity, obsessions, and group influences. If you have an afflicted Pluto in your 7th house, several years into the marriage, your spouse may become a dominatrix, or you discover your husband is, actually works with the Sopranos, or but the desire for a person with Pluto in the 7th house is they want a mate that is cooperative, where they're doing group activities together, whether it's barn raising or a quilting bee or square dancing or whatever it is, that, group camping with friends. Or perhaps the weekend at the nudist colony. Who knows? There's any number of extremes to which this can go. Okay. Let's talk about the importance of the seventh house. In judging the influence of any department of life, every aspect to the ruling planet should be taken into consideration, not merely as harmony or discord, but as indicating a definite kind of condition which arises from the department of life which the other planet rules. It should be considered as an opportunity, an obstacle, friction, luck, agitation, etc., rising from the department indicated by the house position and rulership of the planet making the aspect, which tends to influence the department of life, being considered in this definite way. Thus must the partnership be judged to influence and be influenced by every planet making an aspect to the ruler of the seventh. Well, if we have time, we'll actually do that at the end of the class when we actually look at 2 sample charts of a married couple. Because to do it here right now would be kind of a digression, but this is important to know, and I would urge each of you online, those of you in this room, go home this week. Look at the ruler and rulers of your seventh house, and look at every planet they're in aspect to and the nature of those planets, what house that planet falls in. For example, if you have your sun in the seventh house forming a sesqui square to Mars in the second house, you could find your partner being an agitation to you in the way in which they handle money. Or feeling like you have to constantly come to the rescue of that person because they failed to balance the checkbook or they had an impulse purchase. So that's just an example. If the moon in the seventh house squares Venus in the 10th house, you might feel like that partner could somehow impact your relationship with bosses or superiors, or your standing in the public somehow. So we look at the relationship from one house to the next, because keep in mind, especially in marriage, there is more than one house involved. There are relationships with children, there's relationships jointly with friends, there's relationships to indebtedness, there's relationships to the home, relationships to coworkers. All of that comes into play. All right. I included this quote because Zane did want to talk about the uniqueness of having Uranus or Neptune in the seventh house. It's kind of an admonition, but as a rule, either Uranus or Neptune, insofar as they are involved in it, tend to disrupt marriage and bring separation. In the seventh house, there are instances when exceptionally well aspected in which they bring the finest type of marriage relations. But even in such cases, the circumstance of the union are decidedly unusual. The cusp of the seventh merely being occupied by Aquarius or Pisces, however, is not so drastic. So basically he's saying, it's not so much house rulership, but if that planet falls in the house, it really has a decided impact and a decidedly drastic impact. All right. Oftentimes I have to explain to clients that usually to get to marriage, you have to start with dating. Unless you grow up in a culture where there are arranged marriages, or you're doing a mail-order bride from a foreign country. So we have to look at the affections. Oh, he goes on. Sorry, that comes next. Here's something else. Any aspect of the sun in a woman's chart or of the moon in a man's chart to the planet Uranus tends towards unconventional conduct. What might that be? It is the freedom planet, and its individualism expresses thus in relationship to the opposite sex. Any aspect of the sun in a woman's chart or of the moon in a man's chart to Neptune tends to a peculiar, unrealizable idealism regarding the opposite sex. Neptune in the 7th is not suddenly disruptive, as is Uranus, but the partner is given imaginary qualities which the realities of life do not permit of fulfillment. The partner may be strangely afflicted, or the one desired may already be married. A queer, slow process of estrangement may occur, or some involved condition develop which leads to an unsatisfactory married experience.
And he's assuming that everybody is heterosexual too.
Yes, he was making that assumption. Which reality tells us only holds true for 90% of the population or less.
So,
But somebody with, say, Uranus in their 7th house could have a nice, long, unconventional, whether it be homosexual or not, relationship with someone.
Or somebody could marry and decide after, raising a family that they're gay, which is certainly known to happen.
Oh, yeah.
how about, do you ever see when you're doing people's charts with gay or lesbians that it's contrasexual, where the sun in a gay man's chart would be, and the moon in a lesbian woman's chart would be, so they would be switched. The sun and the moon.
You have to look at it that way, but also at both. Because basically in any of our charts, the sun shows our relationship with men and the moon with women. But you also have to look at it from the perspective of, what is somebody attracted to, and what's in their 7th house, because that defines the relationship, whether it's gay, lesbian, heterosexual, plural marriage, or whatever the full spectrum is that's available. So in talking about the affections, the strength, importance, and success of the affections in general, without reference specifically to the marriage partner, children, relatives, or friends, is to be judged from the planet Venus. The affections are important in the life and powerful to the extent that the planet Venus is prominent. Their general satisfaction, or lack of it, is indicated by the aspects Venus receives, and these aspects by the house positions of the planets making them, and the house position of Venus indicate what things conduce to or detract from affectional successes and in what manner. What is he saying? Basically, the more powerful Venus is in your chart, chances are the more likely you are loved by other people. Mm-hmm.
No matter where it is, Venus.
Right, the relative power. Now, where Venus is in your chart actually shows where you attract love into your life. The first house, it might come through health pursuits, or you end up dating your doctor, which is considered highly unethical. You have to stop using their services first before going out with them. Second house, it could be your banker or somebody you meet in the transaction of business somehow, or at the garage sale where you're vending. Third house, it's somebody you could meet in a classroom setting, or a neighbor, somebody walking their dog in the neighborhood. They say puppies are an aphrodisiac. So, fourth house, it may come through extended family or through things related to the environment, land, etc. Fifth house, through entertainment, sports, and fun and games. Sixth house, they do say that love tends to spark from proximity. The more you're around someone, humans are like voles in the sense of they start to imprint on other humans when they're around them for any length of time. So quite often, although it's also highly discouraged in most workplaces, but romance can bud in the job environment. Seventh house, through a meeting with the public, or love may come through arrangements of some kind, others working as agents or intermediaries on your behalf. So we could take Venus through each of the houses and look to see where we seek to find love. Now, the other thing is not everybody wants to get married. And for some people, it might even be a good idea that they don't.
And you can read that in the chart.
Yeah.
I'd like to hear you discourse more on that if we have time.
It's the seventh house versus the fifth house. If the fifth house is stronger and harmonious, one tends to have happy love affairs. Have you ever known couples that have been together 8, 10, 12 years, and they sort of decide under pressure or that, so I can get you on my health insurance, or, I can inherit or whatever, or we can, give our baby your last name, to marry. And within a year or less, they can be divorced. So the relationship worked fine prior to the legal obligation that was incurred. So you have to look at the relative strength of and the harmony of the fifth house versus the seventh house. If the seventh house is really powerful, that person wants a mate. They want a companion. If the fifth house is really powerful, that person wants to be in love. They want to be giddy in love. They want to be having fun and games. So if you have a discordant fifth house, you might loathe dating. And if your fifth house is discordant, your seventh house is harmonious, you loathe dating, but when you're in a relationship, life is all birds and flowers. If your seventh house is dominant but discordant, I always say you can't live with them and you can't live without them. So we have to look at those things in a chart and sometimes advise people. And sometimes it's hard news because there are individuals whose weakest houses in their chart may be the fifth and seventh. And they may say, I've got great friendships, I'm really successful in business, and I can't get a date. Part of the reason for that, if those are the weakest areas of your chart, your energy does not naturally flow in that direction. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to go through life solitary, but to change that, you have to build in energy to a department of life which is non-energetic to begin with, which just happens to be the hardest work in the world. But it can be done if you're willing to be focused on that. And there are times with clients, and what I have found has worked, and this takes us a little bit into the realm of woo, but sometimes if one is particularly unconditioned towards attracting partnership, what one can do is choose a talisman based upon the sign falling on the cusp of the 7th house. The descendant in the chart is opposite the ascendant, and it does create a strong polarity or attraction. And it starts to, especially in the case of an unoccupied 7th house, it's one way to start stimulating the thought cells around that house consciously. When you wear that aquamarine or whatever the stone might be, you start thinking about partnership, being attractive, charismatic, compelling to another person. And, I've seen people end up married within a year once they've started doing that. So, sometimes we have to go in through the back door to make something happen. But that is a way to stimulate energy where it may not naturally exist in any volume in the chart.
It's setting an intention, too.
It is setting an intention. So, the 5th house. I'm not going to go through every planet in the... Well, maybe I will. But you can pretty much apply what we did with the 7th house to the 5th house. If your sun falls in the 5th house, what does that tell us? You need to be the center of attention. No. It tells us that you want to be on stage, basically. One with the sun in the 5th house has this need to love, be loved, and to be center stage. They want to perform. The person with the sun in their 7th house judges themselves or measures their self-esteem by whether or not they're in love. If the moon falls in your 5th house, love affairs may tend to be fluctuating. They may not be long-lasting. I mean, it certainly sets a condition for one-night stands.
The moon in the 7th?
The 5th.
The 5th.
5th house, love affairs. These are love affairs whether they end up as a partnership or not. Mercury there, that person wants to talk in bed. If it's afflicted, perhaps they want you to talk dirty to them. Who knows? Venus there, somebody loves love and they're looking for either someone who's beautiful or involved in the arts or entertainment. Mars, they're looking for something more intense, more furious, more passionate. Jupiter can certainly work to bring in an abundance of love affairs in the course of one's life. Saturn, ruling the 5th house, tends towards a lack of opportunity in that area. And can make the individual somewhat grasping when it comes to partnership. It can make them a little needy. Persons with Saturn in the 5th house oftentimes don't know how to give in love because the nature of Saturn is constantly measuring, what am I getting, what am I getting, what am I getting? And to hold on to to maintain a love relationship, there does have to be generally ebb and flow. Uranus, sudden, quirky, fast, unconventional romances. Neptune, again, the person's falling in love with the ideal. They have a fantasy that the other person is in love with them, and they're hiding behind the bushes outside their window and they get arrested. And, Pluto.
Dreaming of stalkers, is
He loves me, I know he does. And Pluto there could certainly bring in multiple relationships, or relationships that are very compelling, where one feels, compelled into the relationship and doesn't always know why. Zane says, the thoughts, feelings, impulses, and emotions relating to the love embrace and to other pleasures have been built into the compartment of the individual's astral body mapped by the fifth house. What will be attracted to him relating to pleasures and the love embrace, therefore, must be judged from the fifth house. And to the extent this relation is a factor of importance in marriage, the fifth house conduces to or detracts from marital happiness. So often people, we think of Scorpio because it's I desire as sex. But truly, when you're looking at the houses in a chart, it is the fifth house that determines one's relationship to sex, which what he's calling the
love embrace.
Yeah, love embrace. All right. This takes us to one of the first steps in compatibility, and that is there is little that is more important to look at in a chart than the basics. Fire, earth, air, and water contribute to our temperament. Fire and air are masculine and considered to be compatible. Earth and water are feminine and considered compatible. So let's talk about each of these elements, because the elements so much contribute to our temperament. And our temperament determines our ability to get along with another person or not. Do we have, it boils down again, do we have compatible similarities or incompatible dissimilarities? The fire signs, of course, are Aries, Leo, Sagittarius. They're marked by this trinity in a chart. And I've put down some keywords which really describe the way that all three of these signs, Aries, Leo, Sagittarius, express. They tend to be authoritative, eager, enthusiastic, energetic, fervent, lively, inspirational, passionate, vigorous, and vital. What are the fire signs? They are alive. And so, of course, they're going to want to hang out with other people that want to go hiking, or go dancing, or play games, or do something fun. If somebody is, highly lethargic or studious or immobile in some way, it's not that attractive to them.
They can also be pretty egotistical.
That is possible too.
Fire signs.
Now this material is a little different than what Zane presents in Course 2. He uses different language. This is actually based on the Hippocratic system of medicine. And so a person in whom yellow bile predominates is said to be choleric, from the Greek word chole, for bile. The humor of yellow bile is associated with the spleen and the hot, dry element of fire. So we say persons of choleric temperament tend to respond well to one another, and they also tend to respond well to sanguine personalities, which we'll get to shortly. So let's look at the earth signs. This is the trinity that follows fire. And this is, of course, Taurus, Virgo, and Capricorn. And keywords that describe all of the earth signs are down to earth, level-headed, matter-of-fact, practical, pragmatic, realistic, sensible, and utilitarian. Are they going to like the fanatical, egotistical fire signs? Generally not compatible. So, this corresponds to the melancholic, which comes from the Greek word melas, meaning black, and chole for bile. So the humor of black bile, which is associated with the gallbladder and with the cold and dry element of earth. So the melancholic temperament tends to be very matter-of-fact, practical, down to earth. They are such realists that it's sort of hard to see them get excited over things. Air, which follows Earth, is Gemini, Libra, and Aquarius. And we would describe these signs as being chatty, communicative, ideological, intellectual, mental, outgoing, talkative, social, and they tend to be communal. Now, they are compatible not with the melancholic or earth signs, but they are compatible with the choleric or the fire signs. These are qualities that go well together. So a person in whom blood predominates is said to be sanguine, from the Latin sanguis, for blood. The humor of blood is associated with the liver and with the hot and moist element of air.
And would they also then be compatible with each other, with the sanguine as well as...
Yes, they are compatible with each other as well as with the choleric. Now, up until medieval times, the humors formed the basis of Western medicine. All right, the element of water, Cancer, Scorpio, Pisces. This is emotion. So we describe these signs as being caring, compassionate, empathetic, emotional, intuitive, moody, receptive, sensitive. What fire sign wants to hang out with them? It's
Sexy.
I forgot to put that in there. A person in whom phlegm predominates is said to be phlegmatic. That's such an attractive term. And this comes also from the Greek, phlegmatikos, meaning abounding in phlegm. The humor of phlegm is associated with the lungs and brain and the cold and moist element of water.
That's interesting because in acupuncture, melancholia is associated with the lungs, grieving and tuberculosis and all. But that would be a compatible humor, but not the one that is phlegmatic. That's associated with the lungs here.
All right. To the extent... Oh. Maybe I left this out of the notes.
Yeah.
If the sun in one chart is in a fiery sign, and the moon or ascendant of another chart is in a fiery sign, the magnetisms, to the extent shown, are given a fiery vibration. and to that extent will fuse pleasantly. That is, for magnetic harmony, it is not absolutely essential that the sun signs shall be the same, be of the same triplicity, or even of complementary triplicities, although the energies blend more completely when they are. Electromagnetic energy of the same or of complementary quality will blend, whether given its quality by the sun, moon, or ascendant. But the blend is more perfect if, in both cases, it is given by the sun, in both cases by the moon, or in both cases by the ascendant. This is from Delineating the Horoscope. Basically, the first thing we look at when we compare charts is we're looking at sun, moon, ascendant, and what elements they fall in. Are there any compatibilities there? But I also like to look at the Astrodyne summary when comparing charts, because that really gives you the amount of fire, earth, air, or water in your chart. And by comparing that, one can see, this is a very good place to start, because it does give us basic rules of magnetisms. And we're attracted to persons with whom there is some shared magnetism. And it doesn't have to be that all of them are complementary, but as Zane says, when they are, all the better. So, this is what the Astrodyne summary looks like. You can compare two charts, and in this case, one can see fire, earth, air, water. In chart number 1, we can see that air is the dominant element. Fire, earth, air, water. In chart number 2, fire is the dominant element. And we have decided that they are complementary to one another and therefore compatible. So these are things that make for those initial attractions that we feel towards other people. To the extent electromagnetic energies have a similar vibratory quality, they the more readily fuse and blend. The magnetism of watery signs blends best with the magnetism of watery signs. It also blends in less degree with the magnetism of earthy signs, but will no more blend with the fiery sign, with the magnetism of fiery signs, than oil will blend with water. Magnetism somewhat with that of the airy signs, but refuses to unite with the magnetism of the earthly signs. All right, here's the next thing we're looking at. For harmony in marriage, the first consideration is that the etheric vibrations, as shown chiefly by the first house and the moon, should be similar. If markedly dissimilar, their energies will not fuse. They will not get in complete rapport, and both will experience a constant feeling of unrest and dissatisfaction. The next consideration should be that both belong to the same planetary family, or at least that the mental trend should be enough alike that they have interest in common. Finally, if both belong to the same state of life, or to complementary states as shown by the sun signs, it enables them to understand each other's viewpoint, leading to compatibility. If somebody's ascendant's in Aries and your moon is in Leo, that immediately creates for a great rapport. That came from Astrological Signatures.
Why does the sun get left out of that equation? We're just looking at moon ascendant there.
Well, we discussed the sun a bit already. But, as he said earlier, actually the suns don't have to be complementary. but you want to have some other factors where there are similarities because that lends towards a magnetic rapport.
So it could be moon to moon of the two people.
Right.
And
A moon in Taurus, a moon in Capricorn, a moon in Taurus, a moon in Cancer. There's something complementary going on there. So one of the things I do when I sit down and compare charts, and again, as an astrologer, it's never my desire to tell two people whether they should be together or not. But my approach is, if they've actually chosen to be together, then the thing I can do is point out to them what works and what doesn't work. You know, what they can do to enhance this partnership and what they have to be aware of because of its disintegrative influence on the partnership. So, one of the first things that I do is I look at the dominant planets because we're looking for similarities. Remember, astrological compatibility is based on the fact that we are attracted to things in common with other people. So we want to look and see what's dominant here. Here we have a dominant Mercury, Mars, and Sun. Here we have a dominant Mercury, Moon, and Ascendant. There is one planet between those two that is dominant. With dominant Mercury, what is going to be a basic compatible need between these two individuals? Intelligence, communication, conversation, the need to talk. What's it like in a relationship if one person is chatty and the other is the strong silent type?
Divorce.
Yeah, the strong silent type is thinking, will she ever shut up? And the chatty type is thinking, you know, he doesn't talk to me. He must not like me. So, we can see here, that's one way of seeing, are there basic drives that are shared by these two individuals? Looking at the three dominant houses also can show us where there is a focus of importance. And if you remember one of the earlier quotes about the passions tend to dwindle after 20 or so years, and you better have a hobby. You better both like to knit or something.
I thought it was interesting. Choose a common interest.
Choose a common interest.
It was volitional. It was decide upon something you both want to pursue together.
And other times it comes naturally. So if you have houses in common, this does show one area of your chart where you'll tend to connect. Here, we have a dominant 8, 1, and 10. Here we have a dominant 1, 7, and 6. What they share is they have strong first houses, 21.4%, 22.7%. Dominant first house, of course, can be either the physical aspect of the relationship, as long as there's some physical attraction or lovemaking going on. But it could also be developing a shared interest in health.
Or sports.
Or a physical activity. We both like to hike. We both like to cycle. We both like to walk. And by being able to share that interest, there's something in common that you're doing together. If your areas of interest, which are indicated by the houses in your chart, hold no similarity, then oftentimes you don't find that common element that you can decide upon. And then the signs. The signs are helpful because, again, they bring us back to the elements and to temperament. Are you choleric? Are you melancholic? Are you phlegmatic? Are you sanguine? And if there are dominant signs in common, that can be helpful. Here we have Scorpio, Aquarius, Virgo, Aries, Leo. Well, Virgo is compatible with both Virgo and with Scorpio. So that creates a temperamental similarity between these two. So, as to the general influence on the various departments of life of one person when closely associated with the other, this can be determined, although subject to many modifications, by considering in which house of the chart of one the planets in the chart of the other fall. Thus, by inserting the planets according to the degree of the zodiac they occupy from one person's chart into the chart of another, much can be learned of the manner in which any partnership will influence the life of each. This is so important. And that's what it looks like. What we would do, and we're going to do this at the end, I'm just going to cursory touch on this, and you can hold your questions for when we actually look at the dual charts where one person's planets. But here, this person's sun is at 16 degrees Aquarius. Where will that fall in person 2's chart? It falls in their 12th house. Just exactly on the cusp, 2 minutes into the 12th house.
So it strongly accentuates the 12th house.
Yes, and what's it like when somebody's sun falls in your 12th house? Well, you either feel like they're a burden to you, that they're your ball and chain, or you might, if it's positive, you might feel like that person is so attuned with your psyche that they're reading your mail. They know everything that's going on with you. Over here, we might look at this person's sun, which is what, 16 Leo, 41. That falls in this chart in their 7th house. So this person, person A, is going to see person B as being their ideal mate in some way.
And yet it's an acceptance.
Whereas, person B might see person A as their tent peg that they're tied to.
Especially since they have Saturn in their 12th house, as well as that of their partner's sun on their 12th house.
Yeah, it's stimulating an area of their existence that is weighty in some ways. So we're going to do this with these charts at the end, which is coming soon. And what I do is I will get 2 chart wheels and actually draw in the planets' positions and look at them, because it's really important to see physically where they fall. And again, let's say if in your relationship there are 5 of the other person's planets falling in your 5th house, what's the nature of your relationship? It's hot, yes. If it's in your 7th house, you're thinking of them as a partner. If it's in your 8th house, you're thinking of them as a bankroll.
So how would you relate to the aspect grid when you're putting one person's
Not
chart?
yet.
Oh, okay.
We'll get to that.
Okay.
So I'm not relating to it here. It just was attached to the chart form I used. All right. So basically, take a wheel, put one person's planets inside, and then the other person's planets outside. And we'll get to what that looks like. This is the aspect grid that I work with. I create a grid which is basically 0 to 29. And then I place one person's planets in terms of their degree and sign on one side, the other person's planets. And you can pull out all of the aspects pretty immediately except for the semi-squares and sesqui squares. But this pretty much shows you all of the other longitudinal aspects between charts, and it becomes very insightful. This is the aspect grid I use because you want to see where are the points, planets that are within a degree or 2 of one another tend to really impact. So you want to see where are the greatest numbers of contacts being made. Aspects are very important between charts, and the aspects are the last thing I look at. To me, to me, the astrodynes give us the key to temperament and to see whether there are shared areas of temperament, self-expression and ability, and interest. The planets, where they fall in the other person's chart, shows the areas of your life through which this person will stimulate you and how. And then lastly, aspects show the details, what I like to call the idiosyncrasies of our relationships to one another. And this is the nature of the aspects.
That's a handy chart, too.
Yes, we have, is it prominence? Is it growth? Is it friction? Is it opportunity? Are they obstacles? Do they create luck? Are they agitations? Are they expansive? Are they oppositional? Are they separating aspects? And or do they add intensity? So, one of the other things we look at in a chart, well, we don't want to forget Venus and Mars. Why? Because if you're looking at either a lover or a marriage partner, even in friendships, Venus and Mars can be active because sometimes people have crushes on their friends. There is an affinity that's felt that may never go into a physical expression. But basically, Venus is love, Mars is sex. Venus is affection, Mars is passion. Much like looking at the sun, moon, and ascendant, we look to Venus and Mars to see, are they incompatible elements? What's very important is when Venus and Mars are in actual within 1 degree orb of aspect to one another, because that can make for powerful sexual intensity between two persons.
If they're in opposition, they are incompatible elements, too.
They are, but the nature, if they're within 1 degree of opposition, the nature is to first be attracted and then repelled by the other person. Oppositions or squares between Venus and Mars sometimes lend to relationships where there's real conflict over is this love or is this purely lust?
What if it's one person's Venus opposed the other person's Venus and not a Venus-Mars?
Then immediately you like them, and then it gets to where you don't like being around them. You tend to be repelled by them. Even though the element is complementary, the nature of the aspect is repellent. If I hear her humming that song again, I'll go out of my freaking mind.
That hasn't been my experience in my relationship. We have one of the tightest aspects is Venus opposed Venus in our charts. And it's been a sustaining, our affection contact. We also have moons sextile, exactly. So with those two going on, there's been an endurance to that Venus spark.
Good. Yeah, and there may be a Saturn aspect, which keeps things together.
I think that probably lends difficulty and challenge to the relationship.
Okay, but it can also, if Saturn is aspected between charts, people tend to stay together, even if it's difficult.
That's interesting.
Has anyone here ever had a relationship that was not difficult?
No.
Okay, there. Discordant aspects between Venus and Mars may initially attract and then repel. Because the relationship, if it is purely sexual, can diminish in importance over time. There are others that can last a lifetime.
But, for instance, a real strong bonding thing for us to do is to go to an art show together and talk about our aesthetics with each other. It's not just a sexual, affectional thing.
Right. No, and it sounds like there are probably other aspects in your chart which lend the Velcro to the relationship. It's probably not the Venus opposition, but by being able to entertain or be interested in different aesthetic approaches, and to feel like you can learn from that and not just be, you like photographic realism and you like abstract minimalism.
We're allowed to be very different in our tastes, but we still, bond and stimulate and get high together with that complementary Venus thing,
Great.
Even though it's an opposition.
Great. All right. We've talked about this already, so we're just going to cursory go over this. The sun, his power and harmony determine the type of relationship one has with men, regardless of whether this is opposite sex or same-sex relationships. The moon, her power and harmony determines one's general relationships with women. Same rule applies. You may sometimes have women as clients who might say to you, well, I really don't like other women. I seem to only get along with men. You might look at the chart. There could be a powerful, harmonious sun and a weak, discordant moon, and vice versa. All right. Zane says, the kind of energy she thus receives from men, as well as the influence of men in general upon her life, is determined by the manner in which the stellar cells within his astral body, mapped in the birth chart by the moon, are compounded. If the moon is afflicted by aspect, women in general prove a detriment, such as the aspect indicates. But if the moon receives good aspect, it reveals that the thought compounds built of his experiences with the opposite sex are harmonious, and that women will favor and assist him.
You were reading about the moon, but showing us the sun.
Oh. Well, I won't have to read the next one. The kind of energy she thus receives from men, as well as the influence of men in general upon her life, is determined by the stellar cells mapped in the sun in her birth chart. If the sun is well aspected, she will attract to herself because the thought cells relating to the opposite sex are harmonious, favors and fortune from men. But if the sun is afflicted, it indicates that the thought cells relating to the opposite sex are inharmoniously compounded, and she will attract misfortune from men accordingly. There, we did that one already. Courtship is difficult when the ruler of the 5th house or the ruler of the 7th house is afflicted by progressed aspect. But when either of these planets receives good progressed aspects, when Venus makes favorable progressed aspect, and when the moon in a man's chart or the sun in a woman's chart makes harmonious progressed aspects, such matters move forward nicely. Oh, this is a class on progressions. So, here we have it, an hour and a half into the show. That's what we're looking for by progressions, to determine, is there something going to happen? Will I ever have another date? That's where you're looking. All right, attracting a mate as well as holding one after marriage should not be left to chance. It is a matter of enough importance to warrant intelligent effort of the highest type. After you are convinced that a certain eligible person is suitable and desirable, the next thing to do is to gather as much information about the inclinations, taste, and ambitions of this individual as possible. Don't forget, date, time, and place. With this knowledge, you are prepared for the attempt to win love, respect, and devotion. The one thing that should ever be remembered in this effort is that, and you've heard this before, pleasure is attractive and pain is repellent. People are attracted to each other only because they find pleasure in each other's company. But all people do not find pleasure in the same things. Even a little strife and opposition is more pleasurable to some than entirely smooth sailing. Those are the folks with Mars governing their 7th house. The joys of making up may even at times compensate for a quarrel. Sounds like he has some experience in this matter. One thing, however, is quite universal. No one wants what is too easy to get. The rare, the unusual, the difficult to procure excite desire for possession. Nor does the normal individual desire another who is a doormat. From merely a comparison of the birth charts of a man and a woman, it cannot be determined whether or not they can make a success of marriage. All that can be ascertained is to what extent the fundamental harmonies are present between them, which promote marital happiness. Well, that comes late in the... Yeah, I know. But you brought something up earlier, which is it doesn't tell you to what level the soul has evolved. It's just the basic energies between the charts. And so the other has to be brought into consideration because we don't know. Are we looking at the birth chart of an ant or an elephant?
Or they can be from very disparate cultures or,
Which does happen. People do fall in love across the lines of religion, culture, and class. And much of the great literature of time is based on these love stories of the impossible.
But it can add to the challenge of making the marriage.
Yeah, it does. So, in an afflicted chart, conditioning by environment since birth may have developed complexes or fixations that make it impossible for its owner to make a success of marriage with anyone. But statistical studies show that while an individual is under harmonious progressed aspects, he is unlikely to be attracted towards marrying an individual with such a complex or fixation, or who is otherwise so constituted that he cannot get along successfully with anyone in marriage. So, there is some hope for you under harmonious progressed aspects that you'll make a good choice.
Phew.
Yes. There is hope here. All right, and I want to talk before we go. What am I doing? Going backwards? Or have I repeated?
That's not a repeat.
Okay. I just wanted to talk briefly about major progressions of the moon. The major progressed moon moves through all 12 houses and makes all possible aspects to other planets in 27.3 years. Because its thought cells are so open an avenue for energy, its passage through each house in turn, averaging less than 2.5 years, tends to bring the things signified by the Department of Life, ruled by the house it is in at the time, to the fore. Basically, I'm giving you some information that we haven't covered in previous classes, other than to say that major progressed aspects of the moon are much weaker than other progressed aspects because they don't last more than 50 days, just under 2 months. However, during that 2.25, give or take some months, period of time, the moon is passing through the house of your chart by progression. The matters of that house are brought into the forefront of your consciousness. So, in looking at this man's chart, this is the chart of Bobby Brown. I wanted to use tonight the charts of the late Whitney Houston and Bobby Brown because she's recently in the news, and this was a very dynamic relationship. at the time of their marriage, his progressed moon was moving through his 7th house. So this was a period where he would have felt compelled to focus on partnership at this time in his life. Also, Zane says, in some manner, the popularity is apt to be affected by aspects involving the moon. As it relates to the mentality, the temporary mood is indicated by the planet to which it makes a progressed aspect. He goes on to say, major progressed aspects of the moon attract only sub-major events. Because long observation indicates that on the average, a progressed aspect made by the moon attracts an event only 1/7 as important as attracted by a similar progressed aspect made by one of the other 11 positions. It is customary to designate major progressed aspects made by the moon as sub-major progressed aspects. Progressed aspects made by any of the other 11 positions to the birth chart moon, however, are on the average as powerful to attract events as those made to other birth chart planets. That means any planet progressing forward in your chart and aspecting the natal moon is a big event. But the moon moving forward and making these 2-month influences in your chart, these are smaller things. There is an exception to that rule, however. And if you have a chart in which Cancer is on the cusp of that house, the moon is the only thing that rules that house. The events that happen related to that house will be felt by moon progressions. So let's do some chart comparison. First thing we wanted to look at is, at the time of marriage for Bobby Brown, what was going on? Was there anything significant involving either the ruler of the 7th house? So you can see why I'm bringing in the rules of the moon here. Because the 7th house is unoccupied natally. The moon rules it. At the time of his marriage, the moon was passing through that house, bringing these matters into the forefront. But they tend to be temporary. And I don't think this marriage lasted very long.
So this was the progressions of the moon, not major progressions? This was minor progressions?
Major progressions of the moon. The moon moves through one sign in about 2¼ years. So it can only form an aspect.
We're still in major, because the whole minor progressions is about the moon, isn't it?
Yes, except that we don't really look to progressions of the moon in minor progressions. It's just based on the cycle of the moon.
I understand. Thank you.
With that moon opposition, the Mercury it peaks almost the exact day of their wedding, and oppositions are bad.
Right.
And
So
Mercury deals with mentality, and his mentality could have been totally opposite what she was thinking. Maybe.
well, no, you're on target here. How was Whitney Houston raised? Very straight-laced religious family. How was Bobby Brown raised? He was very street smart ghetto. You have here a disparity of character between these two people that created the ultimate incompatibility. This is a relationship that did not last long. And if we look at his progressions at the time of marriage, the ruler of his 7th house was opposing Mercury. What about aspects to Venus? Venus was in a conjunction with Saturn, the major malefic.
Down there in the 3rd house?
Right there.
And so progressed Venus was conjunct progressed Saturn, and they were both...
Natal. Natal Saturn is 20 Aries 33. Progressed Venus is 21 Aries 22. So it's still within 1 degree orb of aspect. We can see the aspect entered in 89, became perfect in 91. So it had already become perfect before and left in November, left a few months after the marriage. But this is somebody who married under afflicted progressions. What about aspects to Venus? Jupiter was in opposition to Venus. in this chart.
3 to 3, exactly.
So there was,
They were doomed.
they were, but his ascendant was conjunct the sun, which makes me think that he may have looked at this as something that would add to his power urges or make him stand out or seem more important. And I do believe that Whitney Houston was the bigger
She was.
star
Yeah,
Yeah.
in this case.
And definitely better looking.
for sure.
I was curious to see the drugs in the chart because people accused him of getting her involved, and I wasn't sure if there was. Oh.
Mars-Neptune conjunction, Mars-Neptune squares, Mars-Neptune
That's
oppositions tend towards that.
Oh.
So, let's see what was going on with our girl. At the time of her marriage, what's happening with her 7th house?
Ooh, a lot.
Dang.
Which of the two of these do you think felt this was a bigger deal?
Whitney.
Yeah. I think when we look at their charts that there was such an immediate physical charisma that, she may have been giddy in love. Chances are she lived that way anyways because she had a Sun-Venus conjunction in her natal chart. But this 7th house is pretty important. So I would say that marriage was a big deal to her. But what did we say about the person in whose chart Mars falls in the 7th house?
They can be the more combative.
Or they are attracted to an abuser.
Yeah.
So what was going on for her? We need to look for aspects involving the rulers of the 7th house and or to Venus. Well, Venus is easy to pick out. At the time of her, the time of her marriage, Venus was still involved in a trine to the midheaven, 17 Virgo to 16 Capricorn. So this marriage made the news. The midheaven is one's visibility, reputation, all of that. They spent some money on this event. But I also think for her, it may have been a culmination of a life goal. Why? One would guess with this chart that the 7th house is strong. That for her, partnership means a lot. But Mercury, the chief ruler of the house of marriage, was in an agitation compound to Saturn. And in a sense, this could show one's discernment or discrimination, ruled by Mercury, is such that she may have chosen somebody that, I hate to use the terms beneath her, because that really smacks of classism, but she may have chosen someone that was very different from her in terms of what could be anything from, elegance to self-expression to a level of spirituality that is part of character. And so Saturn represents a more, base element. And that, this woman's judgment may have been impaired.
How does would Saturn represent a base element?
Saturn is the basis of elements. In alchemy, it's the metal lead, which is the heaviest, the most toxic, the most oppressive. So, what else was going on? Do we have aspects to Pluto? Yes, Pluto, the co-ruler of the house of marriage, was being semi-squared by Mars. So, already the combativeness is showing up at the time of marriage. But Venus was semi-sextile her sun. So Venus at 17 Virgo is forming a semi-sextile to her natal sun at 16 Virgo. Whitney was in love. Air in judgment, but no doubt it felt good at the time. That's a Venus-Sun aspect. Venus was also in conjunct the moon in her chart. 17 Virgo to 17 Aries. That's 5 signs apart. So she may also have felt like she could, in some ways, either nurture this man or be nurtured by him. And considering that his progressed moon was moving through the 7th house, I would guess that he may have, in the beginning, put on a good show of being a bodyguard or, being protective of her. So, this is an example of progressions as they influence our decisions at the time of marriage, and why it's important to look for both activity involving the 7th house and or Venus.
Could that Pluto in that 7th house of marriage, that even though she's a very big famous star, she may have liked the tragedies that were happening in her marriage to be really private and have a desire that people just really not know what's going on between the two of them? Because Pluto seems sort of dark, deeper, murkier.
Yes, but it does aspect her midheaven. It's forming a square to her midheaven, so there isn't a way to keep that secret.
The Inquirer is always there.
Yes. The paparazzi are everywhere. And whether it's your dresser, your makeup artist, your maid, there's somebody who's always willing to sell a story.
Even at her death.
Oh, that was
Okay.
bad.
Yeah, may she rest in peace.
Yeah.
So we did this, the progressions of the moon. I've already covered that. Now, let's get down to work. This is, maybe I'll backtrack. There could be a reason Okay, I think we've already looked at this stuff, because I actually put their charts up here. We looked to see the similarities among the planets between Bobby Brown and Whitney Houston, and we decided that they could communicate, that self-expression was important to each of them. So that was a connecting factor. That here, the first house, there was either physical attraction to one another, what we call chemistry, or they may have enjoyed doing things physically together. I mean, even dancing could be a form of, physical exchange. And then, lastly, the connection is through the sign of Virgo, which is prominent in both charts. But that is a delicate sign in that Virgo tends towards criticism, but it also abhors being criticized. So it is something that in relationships, it's impossible for Virgo to not notice the faults, the flaws, the shortcomings, the idiosyncrasies, and want to bring them to the other person's attention. Yet if one has Virgo strong, you also tend to chafe under criticism. Why? Because you've probably spent an entire life being critical of your own shortcomings. So there's a sensitivity there. It becomes a voice none of us wants to hear, whether we have Virgo or not. Again, we could see here that the element that connected them was air and fire, which is compatible. Air being the ideas, the sanguine temperament, and fire being the choleric temperament. So they would have burnt brightly together. Now, if we look at the planets falling in the charts, I have given you handouts where I've done this, and I want to show you what they look like since I actually failed to scan them and enter them into but they look like this in your handouts. This is Bobby Brown's chart in which we've placed Whitney's planets. Because of time and the fact that I have somebody coming to pick me up, I won't do all of this in detail, but it's something you can go home and do a simple delineation on. Look at things such as Saturn. In Bobby Brown's chart, Whitney's Saturn falls in his first house, not far from his sun. How would have this relationship felt to him? Constrictive. That's a good description. Her ascendant is in his second house of money. How could she have impacted him? She may have brought, fame and wealth. The moon and Jupiter fell in his third house of mental pursuits. My guess is she could probably make him laugh and lighten things up mentally, because that's where his Saturn falls. So he could be really serious, and Saturn in Aries can be serious and angry. But the moon and Jupiter there could just, help lighten up that area of his life. Her sun and her Venus fell in his seventh house. So, again, even for him, someone who does not have a strong house of marriage, this is somebody who would have been, wow, I want to make this woman my wife. Uranus, Pluto, Mars fell in the eighth house. So there could have been issues here around matters of indebtedness or the way in which the mutual resources in a marriage are handled. Her Neptune fell right at the top of his chart on his midheaven. So chances are being with her may have enhanced his image in some ways, or just brought more visibility. And then her midheaven fell in his 11th house of friendships, so her career might also impact his life in terms of bringing certain friends in. That was the quickie interpretation. Now we want to look at the chart that I've set up for her, if I can find it in my pile of stuff, on the backside. So if we look at Whitney's chart, his Venus and his Saturn both fall in her first house. Venus in the first house, love. There is a physical attraction. Saturn there's the thought, this person either might settle me down or might be a ball and chain. Look at her seventh house, where his moon, Pluto, Uranus, and Jupiter fall. So for Whitney, this may have felt like a fit in terms of partnership. His midheaven and Mars fall in her eighth house, so there are issues, and wherever Mars is, we have strife. And here it could be over estate, insurance, joint resources, indebtedness. Neptune, Bobby's Neptune falls in her ninth house. There may have been travel they did together. I haven't studied them or their relationship, so I don't.
And she also did a lot of travel to Israel in terms of spiritual stuff when she was with her. Well, no, I guess when they kind of split, she did that. No, she went with him.
Okay. Well, that's the Neptune in the ninth house going on pilgrimages. And then his ascendant and Mercury were in her 11th house. So clearly he also brought friends into their lives. And his sun fell in her 12th house, which is the house of restrictions.
So could that be the drug addiction there too?
Yes. That's behind the scenes activities. The last step is basically we look at this sheet. I'm only going to pick out a few, again because of time and my right is outside. But if you can see if things are within a degree of one another. Here we can see Whitney's Uranus forms it's at 4 degrees of Virgo. So it's forming a semi-sextile to his Uranus, which is at 3 Libra, and an inconjunct to his Venus at 3 Aries, and a semi-sextile to his Jupiter, which is at 5 Libra. So there's a lot of connections to her Uranus, which means that this was something that may have been a little quirky or unconventional for her, that brought sudden changes about. If we look down, we can see that her Neptune, which is at 12 Scorpio, sits right on his midheaven. This is a conjunction aspect. His midheaven is 12 Scorpio. The nature of a conjunction is a sole point of contact. Here's something very difficult between the charts. His sun is at 16 Aquarius. Her sun is at 16 Leo. What happens?
Opposition.
The opposition between the suns makes for a power struggle between two individuals. It's sort of one-upsmanship, where who's going to come out on top? Who gets to have the last word? And if one partner comes from a culture of abuse, there's always one way to settle an argument. You knock the other person around. Because if the other person is, wittier or more intelligent or can carry an argument, then it comes down to brute force as being the winner. And so you can see that is a conflict. Yet her moon, which is at 17 Aries, forms a sextile to his sun at 16. And so there is a connecting point where there's a side of her that would have wanted to nurture or take care of him. And on his part, the sun to the moon is the powerful man that wants to protect what he might perceive as a softness or weakness or delicacy in the other person. So that is it for tonight's class. Hopefully you got the soup to nuts on how to look at two charts and really figure out what it's about. You can do this with friends, with spouse, with prospective dates, with your children, your bosses, co-workers. It works with everyone. You're welcome. Thank you. Next week is wrapping it up. It's the alchemy of progression. So it's not just this is what's going on in your chart, but this is what you have to pay attention to, and this is what you can do about it. So it's going to be interesting stuff. Thank you all for being there.